The hits just keep on coming against P. Diddy, with a string of new civil lawsuits filed against the embattled music icon just this week. But Diddy isn't the only one who's facing some major allegations. Two of his sons, Justin and Christian Combs, are both name-dropped in several civil suits that list Diddy as a defendant. And the accusations against them are pretty serious.
The empire Sean Diddy Combs spent decades building is not just under attack from the outside, it's imploding from within, and what's happening right now is the kind of downfall no one could have scripted, because this isn't about music deals or business rivalries anymore, this is about family.
The allegations against 54-year-old Sean Diddy Combs have dominated headlines for more than a month, and he spent most of that time at the Metropolitan Detention Center in Brooklyn, held on some pretty severe federal charges. Just last month, he was indicted by a grand jury on charges of racketeering conspiracy, sex trafficking by force, fraud, or coercion, and transportation to engage in prostitution. By now, you're familiar with the allegations against Diddy, from gun and drug trafficking to running a years-long sex trafficking scheme. There's honestly too many allegations against him to list. According to some reports, there are thousands of people who say they were assaulted by Diddy. All that remains to be seen, but we do know there are more than a dozen civil suits already filed against him, with more than 100 new suits expected to follow. The pattern throughout all these lawsuits is eerily similar. Diddy and his team would allegedly drug or spike the drinks of victims before Diddy and sometimes others sexually assaulted them. There are also allegations that Diddy forced these victims to have sex with prostitutes as he touched himself. He called these situations freak-offs, and oftentimes he recorded them. Here's where some of the allegations against his son Justin Combs come in. So all this takes us back to February, when Rodney Jones, also known as the producer Lil Rod, filed civil suit against Diddy. In his lengthy lawsuit, Lil Rod straight name drops Justin Combs, describing him as someone who solicits prostitutes, underage girls, and sex workers. There's actually a picture of Justin Combs with an allegedly underage girl shown in the lawsuit. Now, in this specific instance, Lil Rod alleges at least one underage girl came to Diddy's home for a listening party. A sex worker was also apparently solicited, and a freak-off ensued. As an aside, this is the same night that Lil Rod alleges Diddy forced him to take a laced shot. He started to feel lightheaded and then woke up at 4 o'clock in the morning, naked next to a sex worker. It's important to note Justin Combs is listed as a defendant on this case because, according to Lil Rod, he facilitated Diddy's alleged RICO enterprise and at times participated involvement in an alleged shooting cover-up. According to court documents, it happened on September 12, 2022, outside Diddy's Chalice Studios. Lil Rod says Diddy, his son Justin, and Justin's friend who went by G were all there when things got heated. Lil Rod says he heard multiple gunshots ring out and later found G on the bathroom floor in the fetal position. Lil Rod says he was bleeding out of his hip and leg area. Lil Rod says he was applying pressure to G's wounds and then asked the crowd to call an ambulance. At that point, both Diddy and Justin Combs disappeared to another part of the studio. Diddy then gave strict instructions to inform the police that he had nothing to do with the shooting. He also forced Mr. Jones to lie to the police by telling them that G was shot standing outside the studio by a drive-by assailant. So that specific allegation involves Diddy's son Justin, but another allegation and entirely separate civil lawsuit involves his other son Christian, or King Combs. Grace Omar K alleges that Christian Combs sexually assaulted her on a yacht in December 2022, and she says it was facilitated by Diddy. Diddy had rented the yacht around Christmas time, and Omar K says
the empire Sean Diddy Combs spent decades building is not just under attack from the outside, it's imploding from within. What's happening right now is the kind of downfall no one could have scripted. Because this isn't about music deals or business rivalries anymore. This is about family.
It was a revolving door of high-profile celebrities and sex workers who were often passed out on the ship's deck. The lawsuit says there were liquor bottles all over, and it was difficult to distinguish which ones were laced with drugs. Omar K alleges that on December 28, 2022, while working as a yacht deckhand, she was sexually assaulted by a heavily intoxicated Christian Combs, who physically assaulted her and allegedly forced her to perform oral sex on him. Since these suits were filed, both Justin and Christian Combs were seen in federal court at their father's appearance just last week. But could they too face charges? Here's where we bring in former federal prosecutor Nima Rahmani. So, talking about P. Diddy, I know we're talking about the crazy amount of allegations against him that are pretty shocking just unto themselves. But then there's also two of his children whose names have come up a bit throughout some of these civil lawsuits. We've seen headlines, both Justin and Christian Combs. Just to start right off the bat, what are you thinking about that, the inclusion of both of Diddy's sons and the accusations against those two?
I think that if we're talking about additional charges and additional defendants, those are probably two of the more likely. And Christian, of course, was the subject of a civil lawsuit where there was a sexual assault allegation naming him directly. So I think if we're going to cast a bit of a wider net, people are talking about family members, other celebrities, maybe some employees like Christina Forum, but I think the most likely would be those two sons.
Why do you think it's the most likely about those two? Just because of the recordings, the allegations against him? What are you thinking?
I think so. I think obviously they're just civil allegations and those cases are going to be put on hold while the criminal case plays out. But, there is some smoke there. And obviously, there's a presumption of innocence and there's a lower standard in a civil case. But you have someone who's been named directly as someone who participated in a sexual assault, and everything else has been rumors and speculation. But here you at least have one verified complaint.
And you know what's interesting about this situation? It's the sexual assault civil allegation filed by Grace O'Marquez. This is against Christian Combs, as you're referring to it. And Diddy is a co-defendant in this case because she says he facilitated it. It was on a yacht that Diddy had rented. But it was Christian, the one who allegedly sexually assaulted her. I mean, so how does all of that relate? The fact that we have Diddy, who's also part of this, but it's mostly on Christian in this instance?
Yeah, in this particular instance, like you said, it did take place on a yacht. She was someone who was working at the time. And, Little Rod was there apparently. And obviously he's a plaintiff in a civil lawsuit himself. But, whenever you are a plaintiff in a civil case, you obviously want to go after someone with the ability to pay. That's what we call a deep pocket. So even though Diddy might not have personally participated in this alleged incident, you really want to wrap him in as a co-defendant because obviously his ability to pay any judgment is going to be very different than Christian or Justin or any of the other of his 7 children.
Do you think that Grace O'Marquez, the plaintiff in this yacht criminal or civil lawsuit rather, do you think that the feds would reach out to her and ask her about her experience perhaps?
I do, and this is why apparently, and obviously I haven't heard him, she has recordings of this incident, audio recordings, and we know how powerful video evidence is. We've talked about it with Cassie Ventura and how that really maybe even shift the direction of this case entirely because, of course, Combs
It's
denied
about
everything
blood and the
until
collapse
CNN got
of
a
the
hold of that
image he
video
fought
in May.
so hard to protect for years. The Combs name once stood for power, influence, and a level of success that seemed untouchable. His sons were paraded as heirs to that throne, the proof that his legacy would continue long after he was gone. From runways to music videos, from exclusive parties to rubbing shoulders with the biggest names in entertainment, they had the look, the access, and every opportunity money could buy. But now, the reality behind those perfect smiles is breaking wide open. The whispers about reckless nights, dangerous people in their orbit, and situations that ended with more than just a bad headline have spilled out. Those whispers are now front-page news, dragging Diddy's sons into a storm that threatens to erase everything their father built.
Actually be compensated accordingly. Unfortunately, when we have circumstances where we have somebody famous who's been charged with crimes, we have somebody famous who's been sued, there can be instances where other folks jump on the bandwagon. And I'm not suggesting that's what's happening here, but it is something that everyone needs to look at skeptically.
Right, absolutely. If you were to bring a lawsuit against someone like Justin Combs, or any of these, and even the cases involving his dad, and you're bringing a civil suit, what facts do you need to have? I mean, certainly if you have a victim who says that this happened and they're ready to, they're able to provide some corroborating evidence that something happened, what do you actually need to be able to go to the courthouse and say, I'm filing a lawsuit against this person?
I think that you need to have somebody who's willing to state under oath that this is what happened to me, that this is what I'm alleging, these are my damages, this is how it's impacted me. And as an attorney, again, I would want to make sure, especially in a lawsuit like this, where it involves a high profile person, but quite frankly, in any lawsuit, that there is some corroborating information out there so that my lawsuit isn't tossed out of court pretty quickly.
And reading through this complaint, it mentions several other lawsuits. You have the lawsuit from Rodney Jones, who's known as Little Rod, and Sean Combs is facing that lawsuit, and his son was named in it, but has since been dropped. What do you make about it having all these other different cases and elements brought in? What is the attorney here trying to prove?
Well, it almost appears as if the attorney is saying, where there's smoke, there's fire. So here are all these other lawsuits, and I've reviewed the complaint, and they talk about them in some detail. They don't just list them. They say, this happened on this date, and this person sued Sean Combs here, and this person sued Sean Combs here for this set of facts and circumstances. And they're essentially trying to say, because there's all these other lawsuits, you should give this one a stamp of approval, because again, where there's smoke, there's fire.
Tony Busby, his law firm is bringing this. He has been in the civil world a very, very prominent name. For those who don't know him, and you work in criminal defense, what do you know about Tony Busby? Knowing that it's his law firm bringing this, what does that tell you?
I don't think that the Busby law firm is taking these allegations lightly. I believe they have the resources to do their own investigations prior to actually filing these suits. So this isn't some, sole practitioner who's trying to jump on the cottage industry that's been created around suing Sean Combs. I think that they have the ability to investigate this. They have the ability to decide whether or not they want to take on these cases. And I think that does lend some credibility, albeit, not a ton, but I think it does lend some credibility to the facts and circumstances surrounding it. In other words, this alleged victim didn't just walk in off the street to some random law firm who then is saying, oh, we now have the ability to sue Sean Combs. This is someone who's been down this well-trod path before and probably knows exactly what the pitfalls are in suing somebody as prominent as Sean Combs.
This lawsuit came down at the time we're recording this, came down last night. So that was a couple hours after the government finished their closing arguments against Sean Combs. And as we're recording this right now, Sean Combs, his defense team is giving.
Sources inside the investigations are painting a picture that's hard to ignore. This isn't about small mistakes or youthful missteps. This is about disturbing, serious incidents. Some involve violence, others unsettling behavior that connects directly back to his sons. Reports describe chaotic parties spiraling out of control, confrontations that veered into criminal behavior, property destruction, physical altercations, and intimidation tactics that sound more like Stroop politics than the polished lifestyle of the elite. Even worse, some of these incidents allegedly took place inside the family home, the same fortress once sold as the ultimate sanctuary of luxury. Now, authorities are mapping out who came and went on certain nights, interviewing witnesses, and connecting dots that place the Combs family in a very different spotlight.
We're going to go talk to Mr. Combs again and see what happens there. They have the October 3rd date. And I don't know where he stood. As of the other day, he wanted to get out. I don't think anybody wants to be at MDC where he is. So we're going to reconvene and see what happens, at a later date. We could go back with another package.
Would it require him to stay in New York? Would it be him to be? I know he wanted to go back to his property in Miami, Florida. And there's also an interesting question I think that his defense put forward. He just got his life back. That's what they said. He wasn't convicted of the top charges. He was convicted of transportation to engage in prostitution, but he would be a fool to try to violate any of those conditions when potentially he may get a rather lenient sentence compared to what he was facing. So 2 questions there. Do you think that it would require him to be in New York as opposed to Florida? And do you think that he'd really be in a position to violate the conditions?
First question is, I can't determine what a judge is thinking. I don't think, and this is my opinion, that the judge would let him out of the jurisdiction. I don't know. We can do private security down in Miami. We could also do private security in California, as we did with Sam Bankman-Fried. I would probably think that if the judge would think about possibly a package that he would want us to keep him here. When we first put the first package together, going a few months back, we did have an apartment here in the city that I did scout out and located a brownstone in New York that was sufficient enough, which we thought, which was one entrance in, one entrance out, for our security to be there, and no rooftop, couldn't get out from any of the windows. So we could always go back and see if that's still available. I don't know if it is or not. So I can't determine what a judge is going to think. I don't think he would let that happen if he decided to make bail, but you never know. This judge was very fair to both sides in the trial. And as far as would he want to screw up what he, after being, the convictions not coming through, I think he got to be dumb to do something like that.
Right.
He is going to possibly get his life back. I don't know what's going to happen in the music world. I don't know what's going to happen in his regular life, but he's not facing the time that he was facing before that.
And I'm going to talk about sentencing a little bit later on. The private security, right, that would monitor
Yes.
him 24/7. The argument could be, and this is something the prosecution's put forward, how can we trust that he's not just they're not bought and paid for, they're not really going to watch him if he's hiring them, there's a conflict of interest there. What's your response to that?
My team is ex-law enforcement, all gentlemen that have been involved either in the Marshal Service, FBI, police, even some CIA. So again, my people would not risk their lives on something or risk their reputation or even possibly a criminal charge on something like this. So my guys are vetted. They've been doing this a very long time. So they wouldn't jeopardize anything like that. Now, when we first talked about private security, Puffy wanted some of his people. We denied that right away. It's our guys. It's my reputation on the line here. And that's when I went to court and Tony Rico and Mark Agnifilo both stood up and said, hey, Mr. Judelson is, his reputation's on the line here.
The lines between public and private life blurred, and in that blur, things happened that can't easily be explained away. For Diddy, this nightmare cuts deeper than any lawsuit or tabloid headline, because it's no longer just about him. His sons are in the middle of it. If the allegations gain traction, they could face consequences far beyond embarrassment or bad PR. Behind closed doors, the family is fracturing. Once presented as an unbreakable unit, they're now caught in mistrust and paranoia. Arguments and finger-pointing dominate, as everyone wonders who said what and who allowed certain things to happen. The industry is watching closely. Diddy's own troubles had already sent shockwaves through music, fashion, and entertainment. But this twist strikes at the core of his brand. The proud father, the mentor, the architect of a dynasty.
As the people who allegedly engaged in that shooting that he was present for. Now, by the way, not sure if these new allegations could play a role in a future federal criminal prosecution of Combs. We're talking so much about the investigation into them. It could be that this is just an isolated incident here and could not be part of a sex trafficking charge. Although I do wonder if this Christian Combs incident or alleged incident could be part of a potential RICO or racketeering charge. As I mentioned on a previous sidebar, when I laid out potential charges that Diddy could face, if we are talking about conspiracy to violate the RICO statute, RICO organized crime, that's what I'm talking about here, that there was a criminal enterprise, to prove that, you would need to show that there was an agreement to break the law, there was an agreement to have this criminal enterprise, and that there were steps or overt acts that were taken in furtherance of that criminal enterprise. Overt acts don't even have to be crimes. They could just be events. They could be things that happen. So could this be an example of an overt act? Could this be an overt act to further this enterprise of illegal sex and power? Could be a stretch. Yes, just something that came to my mind. Now, Miss Omarkey, her attorney, Tyrone Blackburn, said after this lawsuit was filed, quote, like father, like son, it gives us no joy or pleasure in filing this suit against Christian Combs, who has clearly adopted his father's pattern and practice of depravity. So far, there has been no response from Christian or his attorney at the time of this lawsuit. But a little side note about Tyrone Blackburn, the attorney representing Miss O'Markey and Mr. Jones. United States District Court judge for the Southern District of New York, Denise Coate, had some very harsh words for Mr. Blackburn and has even submitted a referral to the New York Federal Court Grievance Committee, claiming issues with Blackburn in 5 cases. In her order, she writes, quote, significant resources have been spent by judges of the court and defendants named in actions he has filed to address glaring deficiencies in his filings. A referral to this court's grievance committee is warranted. Judge Coate goes on to write, quote, a reasonable inference from Blackburn's pattern of behavior is that he improperly files cases in federal court to garner media attention, embarrass defendants with salacious allegations, and pressure defendants to settle quickly. She goes on to write, indeed, his submissions to this court have been rife with disturbing allegations against the defendants and defense counsel. So the big theme here is that he allegedly files lawsuits in the wrong jurisdictions and courts, and even allegedly called a defense attorney, quote, a disgusting racist. Now, this is being reported by Billboard, and in fact, Blackburn wrote an email to Billboard responding to Judge Coate's order saying, quote, not sure how this is at all relevant to Rodney Jones's case or any other case I have. This will not have any impact on my ability to proceed in Mr. Jones's case. Although Judge Coate's decision was a referral to the SDNY's grievance committee and not a sanction, I plan.
Now that image is crumbling. The business world moves fast when reputations turn toxic, and opportunities are vanishing overnight. Sponsorships and collaborations once lined up for his sons are being quietly shelved. People who once called them family are suddenly unavailable. Calls go unanswered, invites stop arriving, and the cold reality of being untouchable in the worst way possible is setting in. Public reaction is split. Some call it karma, saying this is what happens when you think the rules don't apply. Others see tragedy, because no matter the wealth or fame, the destruction of a family is still destruction. No charges have yet been formally announced against the sons, but the scrutiny is real. Law enforcement interest is growing, and every move from here on out will be watched. As investigations deepen, more names are being linked, and more stories surface. What's emerging isn't a misunderstanding. It's a pattern, a cycle many now question whether Diddy ever truly broke away from, or if it was simply passed down. The legacy once sold as unstoppable is in danger of ending in scandal. Not because of one man's choices, but because the fallout has consumed the next generation. This is no longer just Diddy's fight. It's a fight for the survival of his family's name. And with every headline, leak, and revelation, the slow public unraveling of a dynasty is happening in real time, while the world waits for the next blow to land.